The book is called The Climate Caper, and bearing in mind the massive uncertainties that there are to do with this climate forecasting business, essentially the book is about how and why scientists seem to have gone absolutely overboard in selling the theory of disastrous climate change. They seem to be putting the whole reputation of science, which has been built up over the last several hundred years, they seem to be putting that whole reputation on the line in order to sell their particular point of view. The book starts with a bit of physics and a bit of economics, and as an example of what it talks about the fact that the atmosphere and the ocean are fundamentally turbulent, chaotic, and so it is very likely that it is inherently impossible to make forecasts of, let us say, the average rainfall over Australia into the next century. This concept of inherent unpredictability is borne out a bit by the behaviour of the vast numerical climate models that people have running around the world. If you look at the 20 or so models that are talked about by the IPCC in its report, rather more than half of those models predict that in 100 years' time the average rainfall over Australia will be greater than it is now. Somewhat less than half of those models predict that the rainfall will be less than it is now. And what's more to the point, if you run some of these models again with very small changes in the initial conditions, then you get entirely different answers about the rainfall over any particular spot on the face of the Earth. It's interesting that the model, the Australian CSIRO model, predicts the driest Australia for the future, which is a bit unfortunate because this was the scenario of future climate which was used by the economist Professor Garno when he was developing his advice to the Australian government on what to do about climate change. And the emissions trading bill that is currently before Parliament is based on that advice, and so it's a bit sad because it's possible that the whole scenario of a drier Australia is absolute nonsense. And I guess it just goes to show that it's another element of vast uncertainty in the whole climate change business. The book talks a bit about the techniques by which the system, the climate change scientific system, manages to keep the skepticism of scientists within it away from the public view. It also deals fairly extensively with some of the reasons why scientists feel that they need to go overboard on the subject. There are all sorts of reasons, but perhaps the most cogent of them is that scientists have to eat like everybody else, and so they know perfectly well that it can affect one's future career in science research or in climate research if they express too public a view on the uncertainties associated with future climate. I suppose that the broadest picture of the difficulty can be obtained by thinking about the fact that over the last 3 or 4 decades, the actual number of scientists has multiplied enormously, scientists in any field. But as a consequence of that, the old joke about publish or perish has become a very serious matter indeed, and it affects scientists such that they are more or less forced, in order to produce lots of research papers, they are more or less forced either to deal with unimportant subjects which can get published because they're not controversial, or get themselves attached to a field which is politically correct. And again, it turns out that it's much easier to publish papers that support the thesis of disastrous climate change than the other way around. Finally, I suppose one could summarize by saying that President Eisenhower, way back in 1961, was extraordinarily prescient in his farewell speech to the nation. You might remember he was talking about the problems of the military-industrial complex. But in that same speech, he was talking also about the possibility that in the future governments would fall under the thumb of a scientific, technological elite. And indeed, this, in a sense, is what is happening with this climate change argument.